Dia VAHR.uh.geh agus fáilte arás go Irish with Rosie. In this video, I want to talk with y'all about how to say what kind of place you live in and how to describe its general location. This video was actually a great idea suggested to me by one of y'all back a few months ago, and it was Tiffany Watson. So go ramila maigat ahara as an malu intach. Agus anish, tasimish. First, let's look at how to ask somebody where they live in Irish. And you can follow along with the notes that I'll have on the other side of the screen. So you would say, Ca bhfuiltú i do chónaí? Ca bhfuiltú i do chónaí? Where do you live? Now this literally means, where are you in your residence? To answer, you'd say something very similar. Tá mé in Mahoney. Tá mé in Mahoney. I live ... which literally means I am in my residence. And I actually learned just a couple of weeks ago, another way you can say this is Taconi Urum. Taconi Urum. And that literally means residence is on me. But for now, I just have Tá mé in Mahoney because that's the way I've heard it the most. Now let's start in with like a whole list of really common kinds of residences where you could live and tell someone that you live in. First, let's start with the obvious, in a house. Now just house or a house is teach, teach. In a house, ideach, ideach. Now, I is a preposition that means in, and notice that we added a D to the beginning of the regular word for house, teach, and it changed the sound from a T sound to a D sound. You might remember that that's a process called eclipsis. And you also might remember that eclipsis only ever affects words beginning in consonants, never vowels, and even among words that begin with consonants, it never affects words beginning in L, M, N, R, or S. But what is eclipsis? Well, I did a whole video on this, which I'll link below, and you can watch that if you want, and I'll describe the whole thing in more detail. But a quick summary of it is, in Irish, there's a process called eclipsis that occurs in certain grammatical situations. Now, this is one of those situations. An indefinite noun, which is a noun without the article the, coming after the preposition I, in. So in those certain grammatical situations, you look at the first letter of the word, and as long as it begins with an eligible consonant, that is, a consonant that is not L, M, N, R, S, or a loan letter from outside of the Irish alphabet, then a special buddy letter is added to the beginning of the word, and each eclipsable consonant has its own unique special buddy letter that's always paired with it. The sound of the buddy letter then takes over or eclipses the original sound of the word, and it becomes the new initial sound of the word, like in this case, teach, ideach. So just keep that in mind as we go along. Next, we have a detached house. Now, if you're from America like me, you may never have heard of a detached house, and I hadn't either until I started studying Irish. So a detached house is, I guess in Ireland and maybe the UK, what they call a regular house, what we'd call here in America, that isn't like attached to some other residence, like in the form of a duplex or a townhouse. And a detached house is teach scotcha, teach scotcha. In a detached house, ideach scotcha. Tá mé in Mahoney, ideach scotcha. I live in a detached house. Next, you could say in a semi-detached house. Now, that's what we in America would call a duplex. And it is teach lascotcha. Now, in the pronunciation there, I have a Y after the L in lascotcha. Now, that isn't to say that it's pronounced like Leoscotcha or something. I just have that there to indicate that the initial L there is a slender L because it comes before an E or an I, an E in this case. And so it's pronounced a little bit differently than what you or I would think of as like a regular L. It's not L, but more like L. Lascotcha. In a detached house, Ejach lascotcha. Or you could say you live in a terraced house. That's what we in America would call a townhouse. Chach sreiche. Chach sreiche. In a terraced house, Ejach sreiche. Or you might live in a cottage. Chachin. Chachin. The little een on the end is like a diminutive suffix, so you're kind of just saying a little house. In a little house, ejachin. Ejachin. Tame in Mahoney, ejachin. I live in a cottage. Some people live in a bungalow. In Irish, that's bungalow, so that's pretty easy. It's just spelled slightly different. In a bungalow, imungalow. M is B's special buddy letter, so imungalow. In a cabin, cabin is bohan. Bohan. In a cabin, immohan. Immohan. Again, because M is B's special unique buddy letter. Or you might live in a trailer. Trailer in Irish is a mouthful, so chach soluasja. Chach soluasja. Now, soluasja is made up of two words, so it's a compound word. It's made up of so, which means like easily, and gluasja, which means movable or moved. So you're living in a easily moved house. When so and gluasja are combined, gluasja is lenited, which just means an H is added after the G, and the hard G sound changes to a guttural back of the throat R sound, and it sounds like soluasja altogether. So in a trailer, ejach soluasja. Now lots of people live in an apartment, and it's arasan. Arasan. Now, you may notice here that the word for in has changed slightly before apartment. The preposition I changes to in before a word beginning in a vowel. So, in arasan, it would be too hard to just say I arasan, so it's more natural to say in arasan. Kind of like in English, we wouldn't say a apartment, we'd say an apartment, because it rolls off the tongue a lot easier. Before we move on, some of y'all might remember that I tend to lean toward Ulster pronunciations in my videos because that's my favorite dialect. So specifically here with the word arasan, apartment or condo, there are two A's with an accent mark over them. Those accent marks are called faddas, so there are two A faddas in this word. In Ulster, an A fadda can sound anywhere from an A to an E sound. So I think in theory, in Ulster, this word could be pronounced arasan. Now the second A with a fadda at the end of the word is never pronounced E. A syllable without stress on it that has an A fadda always just sounds like A. So arasan or arasan. I have the pronunciation here as arasan just because I personally have never heard an Ulster speaker say arasan, which is not to say that nobody does or it's not just as correct. I've just never heard it, so I'm not going to present it here as fact, as a way that people say it. So just to be safe, I have arasan. But maybe one of y'all knows if arasan is a valid pronunciation for it in Ulster, and you can tell me down below in the comments. Now in Connacht and Munster, A faddas are always pronounced aw. So this would be arasan in Connacht and Munster, in arasan. So whatever dialect you're learning, just say it that way. Now some lucky people travel the country and they live in an RV or a recreational vehicle. In Irish, a recreational vehicle is vehicle hampala. Vehicle hampala. In a recreational vehicle becomes I vehicle hampala. I vehicle hampala. In this instance, the F was eclipsed by adding BH in front of it. BH acts as a single unit in eclipsis, and it, as if it's one single letter, is the buddy letter of F, and it changes the sound from F, an F sound, to V, a V sound. Oh, and let me interject here real quick before we move on. If you wanted to change that initial question, where do you live, to a plural version of that and ask, where do y'all live, like if you're talking to a couple or a family or something, then you would ask, Ca will shiv in Wergoni. Ca will shiv in Wergoni. Then to answer that, if you wanted to say, we live ta muj in Argoni. Ta muj in Argoni. Okay, back to the list of words. So some people live in a camper van. Van hampala. Van hampala. Now, V is considered like a foreign letter. It's not in the Irish alphabet. And borrowed letters are never eclipsed, so it remains the same after I. Van hampala. Alright, the next word, maybe you're in college, or maybe you go to one of them fancy sleepaway schools or something, and you live in a dorm. Dorm is suanlis. Suanlis. Again, I put a Y in the pronunciation after the L in lis, because it's a slender L because an I comes after it. So you're not saying suanlis, but it's not like a L, it's a L. Suanlis. In a dorm is suanlis. S is an uneclipsable consonant, so it's not eclipsed. I suanlis. And last, some people live in a houseboat. A houseboat is chach boed. Chach boed. Now that's the Ulster pronunciation. In Ulster, they would also say chach bod. Again, in Connacht and Munster, a fada is always so it'd be bod. In a houseboat, ejach boed. We're back to the D buddy letter for T. Ejach boed. Now, we can get even more specific with our answer, and either in addition to the kind of residence you live in, or instead of, you can reply with a general location. So, for example, you could say, I live in the middle of town. Or I live in a house in the middle of town, or in the middle of the city. So in the middle is Ilar. Ilar. That's the Ulster pronunciation. Connacht and Munster, it'd be Ilar. Ilar. In the middle of the town, Ilar an Walya. In the middle of the city, Ilar na Carrach. Now, an Walya and na Carrach are both in their genitive cases in this case. After certain prepositions that are made up of two words, a lot of times the object of the preposition will have to be in genitive case. So the original normal nominative version for the town is an Balya, and the regular version of the city is an VAHR. An VAHR. But in this case, after Ilar, an Balya turns to an Walya, and an VAHR turns to Nakarach. Okay, next, you might live on the edge or outskirts of the town or the city. On the edge is erimol. Again, this is a preposition made of two words, so a genitive version of the town and the city will come after it. So, on the edge of the town, erimol an Walya, or on the edge of the city, erimol Nakarach. Some people live in the country. Fuin tua. Fuin tua. Now this doesn't literally mean in the country, it more means under the country for some reason. Now this is kind of like a pre-packaged phrase in Irish. Whenever I've heard in the country, it's always fuin tua. Other phrases that are in the this or that are never fuin, so I'm not really sure why this is. It's just fuin and tua go hand in hand for in the country, and you just gotta remember that. Now, fuin itself is a combo word made up of the preposition fui, which means under or about, and un, which is the definite article, the singular version of the definite article the. So it means under or about the country. Tua, fuin tua. Next up, you might live in the mountains. Snushlevche. Snushlevche. Now, sna is a combo word, kind of like fuin was, and it's made up of I, the preposition for in, and the word n, which is the definite article, the plural version of the definite article the. We have to pick plural because mountains, Schlevche, is plural. Snushlevche, in the mountains. Now next, if you don't live in the mountains, you might live in the valley. And the word for valley in Irish is glan. Glan. Again, the L there is slender, so it's not like a hard, full L like glan. It's glan. Now, in the valley, Siglan. Siglan. The word sa is another combo word, this time of the preposition I, in again, and the singular definite article un, because there's only one valley, not multiple mountains like we talked about in the last example. Now, because it comes after sa, the word for valley is lenited, which means an H is added after the initial consonant, and it slightly changes the sound. G becomes g. Selan. Now, I'll admit, a guttural G sound, doesn't really flow naturally to me with a slender L sound. So if you have any trouble making that sound, and I still do have trouble making that sound, then I would just recommend putting your tongue on the roof of your mouth and then just slightly pushing some air out from your cheek pockets. And that's kind of the sound you want to make instead of the usual lan, slan. Anyway, that trick helped me. Maybe it'll help you. Next, maybe you live in the desert. Desert is fhuasach, fhuasach. In the desert, sanasach, sanasach. Now, sun is just a slight variation of that previous word we saw, sa. Sun also is a combination of the preposition I, in, and the singular definite article for the, un. This is simply just the version that is used before words beginning with a vowel or FH. You might remember from my video on Lenition, which I'll link down below, that FH is silent. So it's almost as if the word begins with a vowel. Sanasach, fhuasach, sanasach. Next, on the prairie. Prairie is fhéarthalamh, fhéarthalamh. On the prairie, Aaron Verhalu. Again, the buddy letter for F is actually two letters, BH, which act as a single unit in eclipsis. So, Verhalu, Verhalu. Now, you might remember that the word for cottage is chachin, which basically just means little house. So, I could say I live on a little house on the prairie. You know I had to go there. Tame in Mahoney, ijachin, Aaron Verhalu. Next, maybe you live by the sea. Sea in Irish is fharraige. Beside or by the sea in Irish is inakalesh and bhfarraige. Inakala means beside, and when its object is going to be a definite noun, which is a noun with the sea, le becomes leis, and then you add the noun. And the noun is eclipsed where possible. So, inakalesh and bhfarraige. Now, another word for by or beside that you might hear sometimes is cosh, and you might have heard coisharige, which is a Gaeltacht region in the larger Connacht Gaeltacht region, and it literally means beside the sea. So that's another version that you might hear for by or beside. I have inakalesh here just because it's also very common, and I think it's easier to deal with than cosh because you don't have to put the object into its genitive case with an aice, whereas you do with cosh. Next, your house might be in the woods. Woods in Irish is cuil. In the woods, sochil. Sochil. In my pronunciation for it there, I have a funny little W because it's not really like a W, like whill. I think it would be in Munster, but I'm not 100% sure. But at least in Ulster, it's sort of like saying a W without moving your lips. Cuil, whill, cuil, woods, sochil, in the woods. And last we have near the river. Gar-dun-owen. Gar-dun-owen. Dun is another one of those combo words, and it's made up of the preposition do, which means two or four, and un, which again is the singular definite version of the word the. So gar-dun-owen, you're literally saying near to the river. Another version of gar-dun you might hear is ngar-dun, and it literally means the same thing, and you can use it interchangeably. Okay, we're on the last page here I have now, and it's just a page of useful phrases that you can use to create your own phrases. And you can fill in the blanks using your own landmarks or place names to describe a general place you live. And you'll recognize a couple of these from before. So again, we've got gar-dun, which means near the, and with dun, the is built into the word. It's made of do and un. Now when you put a definite noun after it, it's important to remember that definite feminine nouns are left as is. Definite feminine nouns are already lenited, which means there's an H after the initial consonant, or with T prefixed to S. Definite feminine nouns that start with S automatically have a T prefixed to them. So a synagogue, synagogue, the synagogue, synagogue. So all feminine nouns, you just leave them as is. But with masculine nouns, after gar-dun, they are lenited, except for words beginning in D, T, or S. So an example would be the bakery, which is a masculine noun, bakus, but when you put it after gar-dun and say near the bakery, gar-dun-wakus, you lenite the B. B turns to W. Gar-dun-wakus. Next, again, we have beside the, inaculish. This eclipses the definite noun that comes after when possible. So, for example, we could take the word for park. Park. It's a feminine noun, so when it's definite, it's Thursday, it's trash day. It's a feminine noun, so when you say the park in the definite form, it becomes an fharraige. But when you put it after inaculish, you'll drop the lenition and opt instead for eclipsis. The special buddy letter for P is B. So an fharraige, the park, but beside the park, inaculish an bhfarraige. The sound of the B eclipses the P. Next, you might want to say out past the something or other. Out past the is tu halden. Tu halden, which literally means like a side beyond of the. And den is one of those combo words which means of the. D and un combined. Den. And the same rules apply following this phrase as gar-dun. So definite feminine nouns will remain unchanged and definite masculine nouns will be lenited when possible. So, for example, the mill is a masculine noun and it's unwillen. But if you say out past the mill, to haul den willen. And last we have across from, oscor. Oscor. There's not much of a special rule for this one for an object following it, except that it has to be in the genitive. So if we wanted to say across from the bank, the regular version of the bank is an bank, but the genitive is an wank. And so across from the bank, as coer an wank. Now there are patterns that nouns follow called declensions, and they follow general patterns. There's 5 of them. And these patterns can indicate what a noun will be in its genitive. Now I haven't mastered those yet, but I am currently studying that. So you can be sure that when I have that down, I'll do a video for y'all and share with y'all what I know and anything that might be helpful. But until then, you can always go to folklore.ie and look it up. Alright, I think that's all I have for y'all in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to give me a thumbs up, please, and hit the subscribe button for more. If you found these notes on the side to be helpful, you can always find them on my Facebook and my Instagram, which I'll link down below. Make sure to follow me on Instagram. I don't really do much on Facebook except post my video notes, but I consider Instagram like my home base, so be sure to follow me there. Thank y'all again for watching, and Chiefy Mayor Balshiv, agus slán go fóill.